Part 8. And that is being young, Peter Walsh thought as he passed them. To be having an awful scene. The poor girl looked absolutely desperate, in the middle of the morning. But what was it about, he wondered. What had the young man in the overcoat been saying to her to make her look like that? What awful fix had they got themselves into, both to look so desperate as that on a fine summer morning? The amusing thing about coming back to England after 5 years was the way it made, anyhow the first days, things stand out as if one had never seen them before. Lovers squabbling under a tree, the domestic family life of the parks. Never had he seen London look so enchanting, the softness of the distances, the richness, the greenness, the civilization after India, he thought, strolling across the grass. This susceptibility to impressions had been his undoing, no doubt. Still, at his age he had, like a boy or a girl even, these alternations of mood, good days, bad days, for no reason whatever, happiness from a pretty face, downright misery at the sight of a frump. After India, of course, one fell in love with every woman one met. There was a freshness about them, even the poorest dressed better than 5 years ago, surely, and to his eye the fashions had never been so becoming. The long black cloaks, the slimness, the elegance, and then the delicious and apparently universal habit of paint. Every woman, even the most respectable, had roses blooming under glass, lips cut with a knife, curls of Indian ink. There was design, art, everywhere. A change of some sort had undoubtedly taken place. What did the young people think about, Peter Walsh asked himself. Those 5 years, 1918 to 1923, had been, he suspected, somehow very important. People looked different. Newspapers seemed different. Now, for instance, there was a man writing quite openly in one of the respectable weeklies about water closets. That you couldn't have done 10 years ago, written quite openly about water closets in a respectable weekly. And then this taking out a stick of rouge or a powder puff and making up in public. On board ship, coming home, there were lots of young men and girls, Betty and Bertie he remembered in particular, carrying on quite openly, the old mother sitting and watching them with her knitting, cool as a cucumber. The girl would stand still and powder her nose in front of everyone. And they weren't engaged, just having a good time, no feelings hurt on either side. As hard as nails she was, Betty what's her name, but a thorough good sort. She would make a very good wife at 30. She would marry when it suited her to marry some rich man and live in a large house near Manchester. Who was it now who had done that? Peter Walsh asked himself, turning into the broad walk. Married a rich man and lived in a large house near Manchester. Somebody who had written him a long gushing letter quite lately about blue hydrangeas. It was seeing blue hydrangeas that made her think of him in the old days. Sally Seton, of course. It was Sally Seton, the last person in the world one would have expected to marry a rich man and live in a large house near Manchester. The wild, the daring, the romantic Sally. But of all that ancient lot, Clarissa's friends, Whitbreads, Kinderleys, Cunninghams, Kinloch Joneses, Sally was probably the best. She tried to get hold of things by the right end, anyhow. She saw through Hugh Whitbread, anyhow, the admirable Hugh, when Clarissa and the rest were at his feet. "The Whitbreads?" he could hear her saying. "Who are the Whitbreads? Coal merchants, respectable tradespeople." Hugh she detested for some reason. He thought of nothing but his own appearance, she said. He ought to have been a duke. He would be certain to marry one of the royal princesses. And of course Hugh had the most extraordinary, the most natural, the most sublime respect for the British aristocracy of any human being he had ever come across. Even Clarissa had to own that. Oh, but he was such a dear, so unselfish, gave up shooting to please his old mother, remembered his aunt's birthdays, and so on. Sally, to do her justice, saw through all that. One of the things he remembered best was an argument one Sunday morning at Bourton about women's rights, that antediluvian topic, when Sally suddenly lost her temper, flared up, and told Hugh that he represented all that was most detestable in British middle-class life. She told him that she considered him responsible for the state of those poor girls in Piccadilly. Hugh, the perfect gentleman, poor Hugh! Never did a man look more horrified. She did it on purpose, she said afterwards, for they used to get together in the vegetable garden and compare notes. "He's read nothing, thought nothing, felt nothing," he could hear her saying in that very emphatic voice which carried so much farther than she knew. The stable boys had more life in them than Hugh, she said. He was a perfect specimen of the public school type, she said. No country but England could have produced him. She was really spiteful for some reason, had some grudge against him. Something had happened, he forgot what, in the smoking room. He had insulted her, kissed her. Incredible. Nobody believed a word against Hugh, of course. Who could? Kissing Sally in the smoking room. If it had been some Honourable Edith or Lady Violet, perhaps, but not that ragamuffin Sally without a penny to her name, and a father or a mother gambling at Monte Carlo. For of all the people he had ever met Hugh was the greatest snob, the most obsequious. No, he didn't cringe exactly, he was too much of a prig for that. A first-rate valet was the obvious comparison, somebody who walked behind carrying suit-cases, could be trusted to send telegrams, indispensable to hostesses. And he'd found his job, married his Honourable Evelyn, got some little post at court, looked after the king's cellars, polished the imperial shoe buckles, went about in knee breeches and lace ruffles. How remorseless life is! A little job at court. He had married this lady, the Honourable Evelyn, and they lived hereabouts, so he thought, looking at the pompous houses overlooking the park. For he had lunched there once in a house which had, like all Hugh's possessions, something that no other house could possibly have. Linen cupboards it might have been. You had to go and look at them. You had to spend a great deal of time always admiring whatever it was. Linen cupboards, pillow cases, old oak furniture, pictures, which Hugh had picked up for an old song. But Mrs. Hugh sometimes gave the show away. She was one of those obscure mouse-like little women who admire big men. She was almost negligible. Then suddenly she would say something quite unexpected, something sharp. She had the relics of the grand manner, perhaps. The steam coal was a little too strong for her. It made the atmosphere thick. And so there they lived, with their linen cupboards, and their old masters, and their pillow-cases fringed with real lace, at the rate of 5 or 10,000 a year, presumably, while he, who was 2 years older than Hugh, caged for a job. At 53 he had to come and ask them to put him into some secretary's office, to find him some usher's job teaching little boys Latin at the beck and call of some mandarin in an office, something that brought in 500 a year. For if he married Daisy, even with his pension, they could never do on less. Whitbread could do it, presumably, or Dalloway. He didn't mind what he asked Dalloway. He was a thorough good sort. A bit limited, a bit thick in the head, yes, but a thorough good sort. Whatever he took up he did in the same matter-of-fact sensible way, without a touch of imagination, without a spark of brilliancy, but with the inexplicable niceness of his type. He ought to have been a country gentleman. He was wasted on politics. He was at his best out of doors, with horses and dogs. How good he was, for instance, when that great shaggy dog of Clarissa's got caught in a trap and had its paw half torn off, and Clarissa turned faint, and Dalloway did the whole thing, bandaged, made splints, told Clarissa not to be a fool. That was what she liked him for, perhaps. That was what she needed. Now, my dear, don't be a fool. Hold this, fetch that, all the time talking to the dog as if it were a human being. But how could she swallow all that stuff about poetry? How could she let him hold forth about Shakespeare? Seriously and solemnly Richard Dalloway got on his hind legs and said that no decent man ought to read Shakespeare's sonnets because it was like listening at keyholes. Besides, the relationship was not one that he approved. No decent man ought to let his wife visit a deceased wife's sister. Incredible. The only thing to do was to pelt him with sugared almonds. It was at dinner. But Clarissa sucked it all in, thought it so honest of him, so independent of him. Heaven knows if she didn't think him the most original mind she'd ever met. That was one of the bonds between Sally and himself. There was a garden where they used to walk, a walled-in place with rose bushes and giant cauliflowers. He could remember Sally tearing off a rose, stopping to exclaim at the beauty of the cabbage leaves in the moonlight. It was extraordinary how vividly it all came back to him, things he hadn't thought of for years. While she implored him, half laughing of course, to carry off Clarissa, to save her from the Hughs and the Dalloways and all the other perfect gentlemen who would stifle her soul. She wrote reams of poetry in those days. Make a mere hostess of her, encourage her worldliness. But one must do Clarissa justice. She wasn't going to marry Hugh anyhow. She had a perfectly clear notion of what she wanted. Her emotions were all on the surface. Beneath, she was very shrewd, a far better judge of character than Sally, for instance, and with it all purely feminine, with that extraordinary gift, that woman's gift, of making a world of her own wherever she happened to be. She came into a room. She stood, as he had often seen her, in a doorway with lots of people round her. But it was Clarissa one remembered. Not that she was striking, not beautiful at all. There was nothing picturesque about her. She never said anything specially clever. There she was, however. There she was. No, no, no. He was not in love with her any more. He only felt, after seeing her that morning, among her scissors and silks, making ready for the party, unable to get away from the thought of her. She kept coming back and back like a sleeper jolting against him in a railway carriage, which was not being in love, of course. It was thinking of her, criticizing her, starting again after 30 years, trying to explain her. The obvious thing to say of her was that she was worldly, cared too much for rank and society and getting on in the world, which was true in a sense. She had admitted it to him. You could always get her to own up if you took the trouble. She was honest. What she would say was that she hated frumps, fogies, failures, like himself presumably. Thought people had no right to slouch about with their hands in their pockets, must do something, be something, and these great swells, these duchesses, these hoary old countesses one met in her drawing room, unspeakably remote as he felt them to be from anything that mattered a straw, stood for something real to her. Lady Bexborough, she said once, held herself upright. So did Clarissa herself. She never lounged in any sense of the word. She was straight as a dart, a little rigid, in fact. She said they had a kind of courage which the older she grew the more she respected. In all this there was a great deal of Dalloway, of course, a great deal of the public-spirited British Empire, tariff reform, governing class spirit which had grown on her as it tends to do. With twice his wits she had to see things through his eyes, one of the tragedies of married life. With a mind of her own she must always be quoting Richard, as if one couldn't know to a tittle what Richard thought by reading the Morning Post of a morning. These parties, for example, were all for him, or for her idea of him. To do Richard justice, he would have been happier farming in Norfolk. She made her drawing room a sort of meeting place. She had a genius for it. Over and over again he had seen her take some raw youth, twist him, turn him, wake him up, set him going. Infinite numbers of dull people conglomerated round her, of course, but odd, unexpected people turned up, an artist sometimes a writer, queer fish in that atmosphere. And behind it all was that network of visiting, leaving cards, being kind to people, running about with bunches of flowers, little presents. So and so was going to France, must have an air cushion, a real drain on her strength, all that interminable traffic that women of her sort keep up, but she did it genuinely, from a natural instinct. Oddly enough, she was one of the most thoroughgoing skeptics he had ever met, and possibly this was a theory he used to make up to account for her, so transparent in some ways, so inscrutable in others, possibly she said to herself, as we are a doomed race, chained to a sinking ship. Her favourite reading as a girl was Huxley and Tyndall, and they were fond of these nautical metaphors. As the whole thing is a bad joke, let us at any rate do our part, mitigate the sufferings of our fellow prisoners, Huxley again, decorate the dungeon with flowers and air cushions, be as decent as we possibly can. Those ruffians the gods shan't have it all their own way, her notion being that the gods, who never lost a chance of hurting, thwarting, and spoiling human lives, were seriously put out if, all the same, you behaved like a lady. That phase came directly after Sylvia's death, that horrible affair. To see your own sister killed by a falling tree, all Justin Perry's fault, all his carelessness, before your very eyes, a girl too on the verge of life, the most gifted of them, Clarissa always said, was enough to turn one bitter. Later she wasn't so positive, perhaps. She thought there were no gods, no one was to blame, and so she evolved this atheist's religion of doing good for the sake of goodness. And of course she enjoyed life immensely. It was her nature to enjoy, though goodness only knows she had her reserves. It was a mere sketch, he often felt, that even he, after all these years, could make of Clarissa. Anyhow, there was no bitterness in her, none of that sense of moral virtue which is so repulsive in good women. She enjoyed practically everything. If you walked with her in Hyde Park, now it was a bed of tulips, now a child in a perambulator, now some absurd little drama she made up on the spur of the moment. Very likely she would have talked to those lovers if she had thought them unhappy. She had a sense of comedy that was really exquisite, but she needed people, always people, to bring it out, with the inevitable result that she frittered her time away, lunching, dining, giving these incessant parties of hers, talking nonsense, saying things she didn't mean, blunting the edge of her mind, losing her discrimination. There she would sit at the head of the table, taking infinite pains with some old buffer who might be useful to Dalloway. They knew the most appalling bores in Europe. Or in came Elizabeth, and everything must give way to her. She was at a high school, at the inarticulate stage, last time he was over, a round-eyed, pale-faced girl, with nothing of her mother in her, a silent, stolid creature who took it all as a matter of course, let her mother make a fuss of her, and then said, "May I go now?" like a child of 4. Going off, Clarissa explained, with that mixture of amusement and pride which Dalloway himself seemed to rouse in her, to play hockey. And now Elizabeth was out, presumably, thought him an old fogey, laughed at her mother's friends. Ah, well, so be it. The compensation of growing old, Peter Walsh thought, coming out of Regent's Park and holding his hat in hand, was simply this, that the passions remain as strong as ever, but one has gained, at last, the power which adds the supreme flavour to existence, the power of taking hold of experience, of turning it round slowly in the light. A terrible confession it was. He put his hat on again. But now, at the age of 53, one scarcely needed people any more. Life itself, every moment of it, every drop of it here, this instant, now, in the sun, in Regent's Park, was enough. Too much indeed. A whole lifetime was too short to bring out, now that one had acquired the power, the full flavour, to extract every ounce of pleasure, every shade of meaning, which both were so much more solid than they used to be, so much less personal. It was impossible that he should ever suffer again as Clarissa had made him suffer. For hours at a time, pray God that one might say these things without being overheard, for hours and days he never thought of Daisy. Could it be that he was in love with her then, remembering the misery, the torture, the extraordinary passion of those days? It was a different thing altogether, a much pleasanter thing, the truth being, of course, that now she was in love with him. And that perhaps was the reason why, when the ship actually sailed, he felt an extraordinary relief, wanted nothing so much as to be alone, was annoyed to find all her little attentions, cigars, notes, a rug for the voyage, in his cabin. Everyone, if they were honest, would say the same. One doesn't want people after 50. One doesn't want to go on telling women they are pretty. That's what most men of 50 would say, Peter Walsh thought, if they were honest. But then these astonishing accesses of emotion, bursting into tears this morning, what was that all about? What could Clarissa have thought of him? Thought him a fool, presumably, not for the first time. It was jealousy that was at the bottom of it, jealousy which survives every other passion of mankind, Peter Walsh thought, holding his pocket-knife at arm's length. She had been meeting Major Ord, Daisy said in her last letter. Said it on purpose, he knew. Said it to make him jealous. He could see her wrinkling her forehead as she wrote, wondering what she could say to hurt him. And yet it made no difference. He was furious. All this pother of coming to England and seeing lawyers wasn't to marry her, but to prevent her from marrying anybody else. That was what tortured him. That was what came over him when he saw Clarissa so calm, so cold, so intent on her dress or whatever it was, realizing what she might have spared him, what she had reduced him to, a whimpering, snivelling old ass. But women, he thought, shutting his pocket-knife, don't know what passion is. They don't know the meaning of it to men. Clarissa was as cold as an icicle. There she would sit on the sofa by his side, let him take her hand, give him one kiss. Here he was at the crossing. A sound interrupted him, a frail, quivering sound, a voice bubbling up without direction, vigour, beginning or end, running weakly and shrilly, and with an absence of all human meaning, into fa so fo sweet tu mo. The voice of no age or sex, the voice of an ancient spring spouting from the earth, which issued, just opposite Regent's Park Tube Station, from a tall quivering shape, like a funnel, like a rusty pump, like a wind-beaten tree forever barren of leaves which lets the wind run up and down its branches, singing so, foo sweet tui mo, and rocks and creaks and moans in the eternal breeze. Through all ages, when the pavement was grass, when it was swamp, through the age of tusk and mammoth, through the age of silent sunrise, the battered woman, for she wore a skirt, with her right hand exposed, her left clutching at her side, stood singing of love. Love which has lasted 1,000,000 years, she sang, love which prevails, and millions of years ago her lover, who had been dead these centuries, had walked, she crooned, with her in May. But in the course of ages, long as summer days, and flaming, she remembered, with nothing but red asters, he had gone. Death's enormous sickle had swept those tremendous hills, and when at last she laid her hoary and immensely aged head on the earth, now become a mere cinder of ice, she implored the gods to lay by her side a bunch of purple heather, there on her high burial place which the last rays of the last sun caressed, for then the pageant of the universe would be over. As the ancient song bubbled up opposite Regent's Park Tube Station, still the earth seemed green and flowery, still, though it issued from so rude a mouth, a mere hole in the earth, muddy too, matted with root fibres and tangled grasses, still the old bubbling, burbling song, soaking through the knotted roots of infinite ages and skeletons and treasure, streamed away in rivulets over the pavement and all along the Marylebone Road and down towards Euston, fertilizing, leaving a damp stain. Still, remembering how once in some primeval May she had walked with her lover, this rusty pump, this battered old woman with one hand exposed for coppers, the other clutching her side, would still be there in 10,000,000 years, remembering how once she had walked in May, where the sea flows now, with whom it did not matter. He was a man, oh yes, a man who had loved her. But the passage of ages had blurred the clarity of that ancient May day. The bright petalled flowers were hoar and silver frosted, and she no longer saw when she implored him, as she did now quite clearly, "Look in my eyes with thy sweet eyes intently." She no longer saw brown eyes, black whiskers, or sunburnt face, but only a looming shape, a shadow shape, to which, with the bird-like freshness of the very aged, she still twittered, "Give me your hand and let me press it gently." Peter Walsh couldn't help giving the poor creature a coin as he stepped into his taxi. And if someone should see, what matter they, she demanded, and her fist clutched at her side, and she smiled, pocketing her shilling, and all peering inquisitive eyes seemed blotted out, and the passing generations, the pavement was crowded with bustling middle-class people, vanished like leaves to be trodden under, to be soaked and steeped and made mould of by that eternal spring. So, foo sweet tui mo.